Welcome to the presentation for our paper Umbrella Meshes.
We are PhD students from the Geometry Computing Lab at EPFL.
I'm Samara.
I'm Uday.
Umbrella meshes are a new type of elastic mechanisms that deploy into doubly curved surface-like structures. Deployable structures are fascinating mechanisms that can transition between multiple configurations. They find applications in diverse fields including medical devices, space technology, or civil installations. The first one here is the classical Hobbleman sphere. Then we have the deployable solar panels from NASA inspired by origami. Eggshells are elastic grid shells that buckle into curved state. And finally, we have a shape-morphing sheet material deployed by inflation. Let's examine two of these structures more closely, the Hobbleman sphere and the eggshells. The Hobbleman sphere is composed of identical rigid linkage elements and expands greatly in volume as the seed linkage mechanism opens up. Eggshell is an assembly of elastic beams that buckles into a doubly curved state as we're pulling it open. Rigid arms in the Hobbleman sphere rotate from configurations that are initially orthogonal to the inferred surface to aligning with the surface. So the initial structure is very compact, but using rigid elements only limits possible deployed shapes. We want to combine the best in both systems by assembling vertical linkage units built with elastic beams. Here's a preview of an umbrella mesh. It has a compact volumetric rest state and deploys into a doubly curved surface-like structure. In the highlight view, you can see that the beams store elastic energy and the whole structure is bending active. To understand how the structure works, let's start with a unit cell of the umbrella meshes.
Inspired from the mechanism that deploys an umbrella, here we model our umbrella unit cell with two plates connected by three vertical scissor linkages. When you bring the plates closer, the unit expands in plane. If we arrange identical unit cells in a regular grid, they just uniformly expand in plane when deployed. We can work out the expansion factor of the unit kinematically. Here m is the length of the plate and h is the height of the unit cell. We see that the expansion factor is directly proportional to the height of the unit cell. If we combine unit cells of different heights, because of the differences in height, the two unit cells expand to cover different areas after deployment. Now we arrange more umbrellas of different heights in a regular grid. As they deploy, since their expansion factors are not compatible anymore, at some point the whole structure buckles into 3D. We observe that the umbrella mesh elastically deforms into an equilibrium. Different height distributions in the compact state of an umbrella mesh deploy into different target shapes. This opens the question, what if we want the deployment to look like a very specific surface? This accounts to solving the inverse design problem, which is the main contribution of our paper. Given an input target surface, we compute the compact rest state of the umbrella mesh, which deploys into a structure close to the desired surface. To solve the inverse problem, we need to understand how to compute the equilibrium state of the deployed umbrella mesh. And for that, we need to model the umbrella units computationally.
For each unit cell, we need to model the elastic deformation of the arms, as well as how the arms are connected with each other and the top and bottom rigid plates. We employ the popular discrete elastic rods model to compute the elastic energy stored in the arms during the deployment. Using this model allows us to accurately track the stretching, bending, and twisting of the arm segments. To simulate the connection between individual beams, we define the generic hinge joints model. First, we have the position and the frame of the joint. Each joint has two virtual hinge leaves that can rotate around a single axis. Each hinge leaf can constrain any number of discrete elastic rods at arbitrary orientation efficiently through a nonlinear change of variables. We then adapt the joints model to define different types of connections in the unit cell. In particular, we opt to use 3 rods with high stiffness that are rigidly attached to model the triangle plates. To simulate the deployment of an umbrella mesh, we want to minimize the total elastic energy stored in the structure. Then we need a term to model the actuation using which we want to drive the distance between the top and bottom plates, or the plate separation, to a target value. For this, we attach a virtual linear actuator to each umbrella unit. Here is a 2D side view of the linear actuator. The blue rectangles are the top and bottom plates. If we simply use a linear spring to drive the plates closer, the spring will be unstable under compression and also risk pushing the plates to an inverted zero-energy state. Instead, our linear actuator will enforce the alignment of the plates normal in addition to the distance between the plates. Our design optimization can later tune the forces applied by the virtual actuators so they are realizable in the physical models. Finally, we have some additional regularization energy. We can then add up these terms to get the full potential energy and find the equilibrium states by minimizing this function. Since our structure have high stiffness to mass ratios, we neglect inertia forces and find a quasi-static simulation to be sufficient. To solve the equilibrium problem efficiently, we compute the first and second derivatives of the potential energy and apply Newton's method. The saddle points of the energy function correspond to unstable equilibria of the structure. For example, here when the structure opens up in plane and just before it buckles out of plane, without any perturbation, it wouldn't know which way to buckle. Our algorithm detects such cases during the equilibrium solve and uses the negative curvature direction of the Hessian to escape from the unstable states. To illustrate all these points better, we'll now show some recorded demos of our simulation framework. We implemented the simulation algorithm in C++ for efficiency, and then created Python bindings so that we can run experiments with different parameters easily using JupyterLab. Here I've loaded the rest states of a model, and we can see in real time that it deploys into a negatively curved surface. The second demo is a positive curvature example. We can first run the deployment simulation. When playing with the physical models of this structure, we observe that the stiffness of the structure changes as the top and bottom plate separation changes. In order to examine the stiffness more formally, we can solve a generalized eigenvalue problem involving the system Hessian matrix of the equilibrium state and the mass matrix. Here, if we compute the smallest eigenvalues of the problem and their corresponding eigenvectors, we obtain a set of directions following which we can deform the structure the most under the same magnitude of forces. The first beginning eigenvalues are near zero and the eigenvectors correspond to rigid transformations. Since we're in 3D, the structure has 6 degrees of freedoms of rigid transformation, so the seventh mode is the first non-trivial deformation. The eigenvalue of this mode is proportional to the stiffness of the structure. Now if I increase the plate separation of the umbrella units and compute a new set of vibrational modes, we see that the first 6 modes are still rigid transformations. The seventh mode is also similar to the previous case, but now the eigenvalue is larger than before, indicating the structure is stiffer. On the other hand, if I decrease the plate separation and decrease the depth of the deployed shell, the stiffness also decreases. In the summary view, you can see that as we increase the structural depth by increasing the plate separation, the stiffness increases and the structure deforms less. In the last demo, we want to deploy a model that should approximate the target surface with both positive and negative Gaussian curvature. Unfortunately, this structure did not deploy as we expected. We can see that it still approximates the Gaussian curvature relatively accurately, but the deployed shape has the wrong mean curvature. The reason for this is that the rest states have vertical symmetry. The spatially varying heights are able to encode the Gaussian curvature, but there's nothing biasing the structure to have positive or negative mean curvature. In order to resolve this, we can introduce asymmetry in the structure. Intuitively, if we want the structure to approximate positive mean curvature, then the top umbrella arms should be longer than the bottom arms. If we now deploy this new structure, we see that it reliably goes to the target.
As we have seen from the last example, the ability to separate the top and bottom height variables is very important to encode mean curvature of the target surface. To parameterize the design space of umbrella meshes, we also need to consider fabrication constraints. We want the structures to have zero residual stress in the rest state. We also decided to have identical triangle plates to enable possible mass productions. So our current design parameters are simply the top and bottom heights of each umbrella unit. Our design goals include target surface approximation. The deployed structure should approximate the target surface as closely as possible. The color here indicates the distance from the umbrella mesh to the target surface. Secondly, we want the structure to be subjected to low strain energy. Here the color is proportional to the strain in the beams. Lastly, we want the forces computed from the linear actuator to be small. By separation forces, we mean the internal forces at that configuration that are pulling the top and bottom plates away from each other. The first step of our design optimization is to find a good initialization of the height variables and the 2D shape of the compact state. Both of them can be jointly computed using surface parameterization techniques, and in our case, the conformal flattening. Notice that a single unit always expands or contracts isotropically, that is, uniformly in all directions. A conformal transformation consists of local rotations and uniform scaling, but not shearing. This exactly matches how our unit cell behaves in plane. Here is another example of a conformal map where the local scale factor is indicated by the function sigma. The Yamabe equation connects the Gaussian curvature of the target surface to the conformal scale factors. The discretization of these continuous conformal scale factors gives the length expansion factors for each unit cell. We can compute the height of each umbrella unit from the expansion factor using the kinematic relation seen before. Here is an overview of our computational pipeline. We start with the target surface, conformally flatten it to the plane, then we overlay the 2D domain with a regular triangular tiling and use the scale factors to initialize the umbrella units. If we deploy the structure with these initial height values, we see that it goes close to the target surface, but it's not perfect, warranting optimization. As discussed before, the design objectives include target surface approximation, low strain energy, and low separation forces. The vector P contains the design parameters. X star here is the equilibrium state of the deployed structure defined by the current design parameters. To compute the objectives, we need to solve the equilibrium problem at each iteration of the design optimization. We use the adjoint method to efficiently compute the gradients of the objective and use second-order sensitivity analysis along with automatic differentiation to compute the Hessian vector products. With this derivative information, we apply Newton's EG to solve the design problem. Here is a time lapse of the design optimization process, starting with the unit cells initialized with conformal flattening. The optimization significantly improves the approximation of the target surface. To validate our design method, we fabricated a set of physical prototypes. The rest state of umbrella meshes has zero residual stress, so we can 3D print the structure in one piece. This example here deploys into a hemisphere. We can also fabricate larger models using CNC milling. We mill the compliant joints on a pair of umbrella arms and mill the triangle plates separately, which are then assembled. Subsequently, we can assemble a complete umbrella mesh. This model deploys into a saddle. Here we see the deployment for the simulated model, and here the deployment for the physical model. In simulation, we have the virtual linear actuator at every unit. In the physical model, we find that if we deploy a few units, the rest will be locked into place already. We scan the fabricated model to compare with the target surface. The average deviation is about 1.3% bounding box diagonal for this model. Here you see that the saddle is bistable. It doesn't need any external forces to maintain the deployed shape, and we can undeploy it again by forcing some units to open. The conformal initialization part of umbrella meshes is very similar to a previous deployable auxetic material. There, the triangle linkages rotate in plane to expand an area, and the maximum expansion factor for each unit is 2. Under this expansion factor bound, they show that the maximal patch of a sphere that the deployed shape can cover is a hemisphere. In comparison, umbrella meshes transfer material not just in plane, but also transversely out of plane. Through our kinematic analysis, we see that as the height of the unit cell increases, the expansion factor increases linearly with no theoretical upper bound. So what is the maximum patch of a sphere that an umbrella mesh can cover? We started with a patch covering 30% of a sphere. We can also of course cover 50% the hemisphere, and we can continue to cover 70% of the sphere, which is now out of the achievable range of existing auxetic materials. We actually built and deployed the 70% sphere. But in principle, we can approximate arbitrary parts of the sphere as umbrella meshes impose no bounds on the expansion factor. Lifting the scale factor bounds also gives us more design freedom for any specific target shape. We don't always have to use the conformal flattening with the lowest maximal scale factor. Here is a sequence of designs trading off between the heights of the umbrella units and the shape of the 2D domain in the rest state.
There are many ways to further expand the design space of umbrella meshes. Currently, we're using equilateral triangle plates with 3 arms that always deploy into a hexagonal pattern, but we could have other units and topologies that deploy into quad meshes or triangle meshes or even unstructured meshes. There are many other parameters beyond the top and bottom heights that we can optimize in the current unit cell design. For example, we're fixing the dihedral angle between the arms at 120 degrees, but we could relax this further to reduce the stresses in the deployed structure. The catch is that we need to consider the fabrication constraints. If we still want to have zero energy rest states, then we need to define some additional integrability conditions as we add more parameters. Earlier in the live demos, we showed that we can control the stiffness of umbrella meshes by introducing structural depth. So far, we're assigning the target plate separation, but we can also potentially achieve spatially varying stiffness by optimizing the target plate separations. This will require further study on the structural stability of umbrella meshes, in particular how the structure will perform under different load conditions, such as gravity or wind. The last point I would like to discuss is the bistability of umbrella meshes, which was already shown before for the saddle shape example. We can plot the elastic energy that the structure endured during the deployment sequence, and see there is an energy barrier between the initial and deployed state, indicating the structure is bistable. Here we obtain the intermediate states by linearly interpolating between the initial and deployed umbrella plate separations, and solving the equilibrium problem under those plate separation constraints. However, these linearly interpolated plate separations might not be the best way to schedule the deployment of each unit cell. Finding the optimal actuation sequence is still a very interesting open problem. Analyzing the structural stability and finding the optimal actuation sequence will also be very helpful and probably necessary when we want to build architectural scaled structures. Here we show a case study where we coupled an umbrella mesh with elastic fabrics, and it could potentially be used as the roof of a stadium. We hope to explore such architectural designs and many other applications that umbrella meshes enable in the future. We would like to thank the anonymous reviewers for their feedback on the paper and our co-authors for collaborating on this project. We're grateful to the Swiss National Science Foundation for funding our research. Thank you for listening.